Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Let's Talk Policy at the Kautilya School of Public Policy. I'm Nidhi Razdan, and today we're going to talk about the one big foreign policy issue that's making headlines, not just in India, but all around the world. That is what has happened in Afghanistan. Every day we have been reading the headlines about the dramatic developments, the fall of Kabul, the Taliban takeover, and as we speak, the contours of a new government headed by the Taliban are being worked out in Kabul. Whatever has happened in Afghanistan has repercussions, not just for Afghanistan itself. We clearly know it has repercussions for the entire region, certainly for India, which is looking at these developments with concern and very, very cautiously and carefully. It has repercussions for the entire world. There's a lot to talk about this evening with our stellar panel. These are all people who have worked very closely in areas of international diplomacy, international relations, especially with regard to Afghanistan. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome first Mr. Navteej Sarna, India's former ambassador to the United States, Professor Amitabh Mattu, who's a professor of international relations at JNU and the University of Melbourne. Dr. Shanti D'Souza is a founding professor at Kautilya, has worked extensively on Afghanistan for many years now, and her expertise will be very valuable to us today. Suhasini Haidar, the diplomatic editor of The Hindu, joining us today at Kautilya as well. Thank you very much to all of you for being with us. Let me take the first question to you, Dr. Shanti. India is in currently wait and watch mode as New Delhi looks at things unfold very cautiously. There was a meeting that also took place between the government of India and the Taliban in Doha this week. How should we look at this first official contact? How do you see it?
Well, I see it as a sign of necessity because India was really not prepared for the scenario which has unfolded. That is the takeover of the Taliban by itself. It's actually a worst case scenario for India. And I think as India, as you rightly said, India has always pursued a wait and watch policy. It actually became wait, watch and flee. And given that the chips were down and India didn't have much option, India will have to engage the Taliban at some level. So having said that, I think the first official contact in Doha was out of necessity for immediate reasons where in terms of evacuation of the nationals and also of the Afghans who are still left behind and who have worked with the Indian mission. Second is also about India's presence because India has invested tremendously in Afghanistan. It has pledged more than $3 billion US. It's one of the regional donor of highest contribution, and also it has had goodwill in that country. So having said that, India needed to establish that contact, but the fundamental question is it will be done now? Should it have been started a little earlier? Because from 2014, consequently, the US presidents have been making announcement of exit. And India primarily functioned under the US security umbrella. And given that the things were changing dramatically in Afghanistan, there was a need to look at the policy as things were changing. And India seemed to have caught on the back foot. And now the initial contact was out of necessity. But I think we need to make a distinction between engaging the Taliban and recognizing the Taliban. And that's where we have to have a debate of whether that recognition should come with some conditions. And also the fact that you have Amrullah Saleh, who is the legitimate vice president of Afghanistan, who has put up a resistance. So we do have certain leverages in Afghanistan, and we have to look at that carefully before going out for all-out recognition of Taliban.
Very interesting points raised by you there. Ambassador Sarna, we are a public policy school, and therefore this is clearly a foreign policy challenge for India at the moment. How do you think India can navigate this? As Professor Shanti rightly pointed out, there's a difference between engaging with the Taliban and actually recognizing a Taliban government. How do you think India can move from here?
Well, thank you, Nidhi. And I think that's a very, very valid point made by Dr. Shanti. I think there's no point now looking at what we could have done in the last 3 or 4 years. That ship, so to speak, has sailed. And now we have to see how we deal with this reality on the ground. So I would agree that some kind of engagement is absolutely unavoidable and perhaps even desirable if we want to take care of our interests. And for that, we have to be very clear, what are our interests? I think our interests, firstly, is that Afghanistan should not be used by groups inimical to India for promoting terrorism. Our interest is that Pakistan should not have free rein in this strategic depth, as they call it, which is a related point. And the third, that we should have access to Central Asia, etc., for our trade, and we should remain, not get cut off from the connectivity projects, which are very, very important for us. And then, of course, take care of our own projects. I think we have to work on an engagement and watch and wait at the same time, because we have to see the actual conduct of the Taliban. We have to see if they actually form a representative, inclusive government. We have to see if they are willing to listen to us. So I would go a step further than even Professor Shanti, that one is engagement. The second is recognition. There's a recognition of a state. A state is already recognized, there is Afghanistan. Whether you want to recognize the Taliban as a representative government of Afghanistan, we should be in absolutely no hurry. And even if we were to reach a point where we were to recognize them, that doesn't mean an embrace. You know, we recognized the state of Israel, not that the two issues are comparable. We recognized the state of Israel in 1950. We set up diplomatic relations in 1992, more than 40 years later. So you can nuance this. This is a highly complex, nuanced process. So I would say engage, stay very clear on what our interests are, see how the conduct is there, and build a lot of combines with others who share, at least partially, our interests.
Okay, well, number of issues on which I want to continue to question you on, but I'll take opening comments from Professor Mattu and Suhasini Heather first. Professor Mattu, Ambassador Sarna says one of the preconditions or one of the conditions India should put forward is to, sort of limit Pakistan's sphere of influence over this new government in Afghanistan. Is that going to be the toughest thing to do? We have the ISI chief in Kabul today.
Nidhi, first of all, I think I would like to make a distinction between tactics and strategy, and about the nature of the movement that the Taliban represents. I have studied protest movements, social movements, and extremist movements. Now, obviously, there is a section of a leadership of an extremist movement or a protest movement which would like to compromise with power. However, once it does that, it loses the support of its cadre. The cadre, in this case, the Taliban, require that psychological absolutist goal in order to sustain their activism. The moment the Taliban decides, or even a section of its leadership decides to compromise on the guiding principles that have so far brought them to where they are today, they will lose the support of their core base. They cannot afford to do that. So any belief that suddenly the Taliban will become reasonable people is based on a lack of a historical understanding of how extremist movements function, how quite easily they will lose their core base if they're seen as compromising with forces which are going to dilute their agenda. So I begin with the assumption that the Taliban are not going to change. Now, I also agree that tactically, if there is a section which purely for the purposes of reaching out to India or ensuring a certain degree of diplomatic civility, one of the reasons given for the fact that they have not announced the government is that they want to present this image of being a cohesive, all-Afghan government. Now, if in that process there might be some tactical gains, as long as you're completely clear that strategically you are faced with a force that represents almost everything that you stand against, whether it is in terms of women, whether it's in terms of fundamental freedoms, whether it's in terms of bigotry, whether it's in terms of sectarian and view of everything that they believe in. In fact, they are probably the greatest antithesis of all that Islam stands for. Islam is the religion of peace. So that is the second point that I wanted to make. The third point is the Taliban as a fighting force. The Taliban as an ideological force are a creation of the madrasas. The Taliban as a fighting force are the creation of the ISI and, unfortunately, Mr. Biden's sleepy act of leaving all those arms behind. So how can you believe that you will be able to disconnect? Yes, there is a contradiction between the Afghans and the Pakistan generally as neighbors, as people who do not recognize a frontier or the Durand line and so on and so forth. And there is a greater solidarity between the Pakhtuns and both sides. But those contradictions will emerge in the long term. At the moment, to expect the Taliban to disconnect from the ISI is like believing that the Jesus Christ will disconnect himself from the apostles. It cannot happen. But because we are trying to make the best of a bad deal, the fact of the matter remains the only time that you had any leverage in Afghanistan was during the Bonn conference. And after that, you have lost most of the leverage because you don't have a Northern Alliance there.
So therefore, are you saying that engagement is not desirable? Recognition is I think we all agree is a sort of a longer term goal or dur ki baat jise kehte hain. But are you saying that even engagement is not desirable even at this stage?
Tactical engagement, yes, but not more than that.
Okay. So Hasni Haider, you've covered this story very closely in all its sort of myriad ways. How do you see India's options at the moment? You wrote an excellent piece some days ago about how, frankly, every choice that India has is a pretty tough one.
No, India does have some very tough choices, and I think we're taking the worst of all our options over here because we are standing for neither pragmatism nor principle. Because if it was about principle, then India would accept, as Dr. Mattu has said quite rightly, that the Taliban is not going to change, that the people who are in power structures, whether or not they turn out to be in government in Afghanistan, are going to be include terrorists who have attacked the Indian embassy, Indian consulate, killed Indian diplomats in the most brutal possible suicide bombings. The attack on the Gurdwara in Kabul was as much an attack on Indian interests over there. So the principle has gone out of the window with the announcement by the Ministry of External Affairs that we are now talking to Mr. Stanigzai, we are now engaging with the Taliban. In fact, the Foreign Secretary has gone one step further and he has said our conversations with the Taliban tell us that they are very reasonable. Now, if there are conversations and the government is telling us something they have not admitted to earlier, that there have been several conversations, and obviously behind the scenes we know that there have been. So the principle has gone out the window, and if this is now going to be about pragmatism, then it cannot be some negative list of things that all that we have to do is limit the damage out of Afghanistan. If you are going to the point of engaging the Taliban, of joining this international bandwagon that you have stayed away from all this time, then it may as well lead to some kind of leverage, as has been referred to earlier. Then India needs to see about how it wants to engage itself with an Afghanistan that is led by this particular group. So I think what we're seeing over here is a kind of, it was a Hobson's choice. There was a real catch-22 there about which way to go. But I think what we've done is we've dropped both principle and pragmatism in the kind of engagement we are looking at with the Taliban. Some amount of engagement is going to be necessary. We saw it when we needed to evacuate the Indian embassy. Nobody was coming to India's support to take our embassy staff out. What did India have to do at that time? They had to contact the Taliban through people in other countries, through leaders inside Afghanistan that we knew. We had to cut deals with local commanders, cut deals right at the top in order just to ensure the safe passage of our Indian embassy staff to the airport. That kind of tactical engagement, the engagement required to ensure that overflight of Afghanistan is safe, the tactical engagement required perhaps for transit trade at a later date. I don't know if that's going to be an early possibility. All of those are over there. And I just very quickly want to say we did not lose our leverage after the Bonn conference. India, in fact, has fought international powers, including the United States, that has always sought to push India out of Afghanistan. In 2001, we built a reputation. In 2011, again, when they wanted to have us sidelined on the subject of talks with the Taliban, India went ahead and signed the first strategic partnership agreement with Afghanistan. I find it quite defeatist to assume that at this point, India has zero leverage. But I do think that a choice has to be made on how India wants to address the Afghan people as much as it needs to address this regime in power right now.
I think that's very important. In fact, Professor Shanti, let me ask you about that last point in particular that Suhasini Haider spoke about. How does India, still keep its leverage with the Afghan people. That's been so important in terms of our development aid, the infrastructure projects, the goodwill that India has traditionally enjoyed with the Afghan people. How do we sort of make that distinct from having to engage with a terrorist leadership, frankly, because they are still, designated terrorists as per the UN?
Yeah, I think that's an important point, because whatever India did in its aid and development assistance policy was directed in actually building the capacity of the Afghans. And there is considerable goodwill still inside Afghanistan for India. So having said that, most of the projects India had initiated had been done based on Afghan needs and ownership. And there's considerable Afghan ownership of those projects. So there is a possibility that we could continue our small scale projects with the Afghans. But the fundamental question again is, as it's been highlighted, we simply lost that leverage inside Afghanistan with different political leaders. And we didn't see that shifting sands of, the way the political transition was occurring, be it in terms of,
That's okay.
There's a little bit of, yeah.
Electricity is gone.
So be it in terms of looking at the political transition or the peace processes, I think India just lost its leverage inside Afghanistan. So the question is, given that we had the goodwill and we do have Afghan people whose interests we have to protect, there is a need to have a certain engagement with the Taliban. Now, if you look at the way the engagement occurred, there were feelers from the field about the Taliban reaching out to India at different stages. And for my visits and interactions at the various provincial levels, projects, I did get a feel that the Taliban were open to certain Indian projects which were useful to the Afghans. And these are basically the local commanders, and they still look at India as a friend. So there is some scope of engagement at that level. Now, the problem is at the leadership level. What you see today, be it in terms of Stanexai or any of these people coming from the Doha Shura, is very distinct from the Emir, Haibatullah Akhund. We don't know. We do get reports that he is now in Kandahar and he's hiding the Kandahar Shura. But there are distinctions between the leadership which is emerging. And that's where I think India has certain leverage, again, in the leadership of building an inclusive government. So if the Doha Shura is reaching out to other opposition leaders like Karzai, Dr. Abdullah, or Hekmatyar, there is a probability that this government could be inclusive in the way which would benefit India. Vis-a-vis a government which is totally controlled by the Kandahar Shura and is totalitarian, and as Dr. Matu pointed out, that would again be a problem for India, because it's just about the security interests. It's more about the Afghans, in which India has invested tremendously. They do have a historical memory of what happened during the Soviet intervention when India didn't actually support them. And this would be a second letdown for them. And here again, I think media just want to bring this point that how we actually treated Afghans who were in trouble. Suhasini mentioned about those issues where we did have real trouble even getting our embassy staff out of Kabul. But those Afghans who had helped India and the Indian consulates, they are still trapped in situation, and we have not been able to help them. And this is where I think we let down an image of a friend and reliable partner. We could have signed that agreement on strategic partnership in 2011. We could be the first country. But when things change so dramatically and things get difficult, we are not able to rescue the people who had invested in us. And I think that's a gap which is going to play out if we don't address it now, because we do still have that goodwill. We do have people in Afghanistan who are continuing with the projects. So if you don't actually engage those people in a way that will be sustainable, then I think our entire policy will be in trouble.
I want to take a moment to bring you two voices that we have from Afghanistan this evening on this panel. We have Ms. Mehbooba Siraj, who is one of the most well-known women's rights activists in Afghanistan. When she speaks, everyone listens, as far as the situation regarding women is concerned. Ma'am, we are so happy that you could join us this evening. We also have Ms. Nargis Nihan, who's been a former minister in the government of Afghanistan. And we were very keen to talk to both of you to understand what's going on there. Ms. Mehbooba Siraj, to you first. How are things at the moment? I saw one of your comments recently. You said with the Taliban taking over the government there, your country would go back 200 years. Is that worst nightmare of yours coming true? Ma'am, you'd have to unmute your mic first. Unmute your mic.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me in here. And before starting this, I want to send my hellos to Nargis Nehan. I'm so glad she's going to be there also. Right now in Afghanistan, I don't know if you knew anything about it or not. Like today, a group of our women, actually Afghan women, they went for a demonstrations on the streets of Kabul. Not only today, but yesterday the same thing happened, and then in Herat, another group of them went there also, went to demonstrate. And the demonstrations really was regarding the rights of the Afghan women. And mainly the whole thing was triggered over something that Mr. Stanagzai said. Mr. Stanagzai said when the government of Afghanistan is formed, women are not going to have a place at the higher echelon of the government, like at the level of the ministerial level. And that, in a way, really triggered something amongst all of the Afghan women that, okay, you know, if we are not, if we cannot have that in our own country, then where else in the world we are going to be expecting to go at a higher level of government and take our part in there. So that actually, you know, triggered, that was the reason for these demonstrations. There was very peaceful demonstrations. There was just, a group of women walking. And today, apparently, you know, some of those girls, they got hit with the butt of the guns that they have. And actually they were using the tear gas as well, the Taliban. So this is something that, you know, it's important for me to mention it here, and I'm going to mention it everywhere for the reason that those girls, they are my girls, they are sisters, they are Afghans, they are Afghan women that they went on the streets. And it just for us to tell the world that we are standing with them, and what they did was absolutely a peaceful demonstration, and that should be allowed, that they should do it without them getting hurt. As far as the rest of the country is concerned, things are going, we still don't have a government. Last night, for example, there were these Shadiana type of, machine guns fired in the air, which actually killed 17 people and 40 something people got wounded. It was the most, unbelievable situation. I mean, the noise and everything was very bothersome for everybody and really upset everyone a whole lot because of the noise and everything. And we thought there was a huge war that broke. So yeah, so that's, that's what is actually going on in Afghanistan right now.
I'll let you take a break to have a glass of water, ma'am. In
Thank
fact,
you.
yes, we have been following the events very closely there, and the fact that women have had these demonstrations, I can tell you honestly, it gives you goosebumps sitting here, because it's very, very brave of them in these circumstances to take that chance and go out onto the streets and fight for their rights. So our solidarity is with you, as fellow women as well. Let me ask Ms. Nargis Nehan, for those who don't understand the history of Afghanistan and what has happened in the last 20 years or so, if you could just give some context as to how the lives of women actually changed and changed for the better, and what you could possibly be looking at now. Ms. Nehan, if you could unmute your mic, please, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Greetings to all of you, and my warm greetings to Mo.
Hi, sweetheart. Please, we are still together, Nargis Jan. We are. Can't do anything without you guys in here.
Life had changed a lot in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is having the population is 80% of population is under 13, and this is the population that they are raised in a different kind of Afghanistan. They have not gone through the hardship that most of us have gone through, that we have seen this situation for the second time coming in Afghanistan. So for us, it was not something as a big surprise, but it's a huge shock for our young generation, for 80% of our population, because they haven't seen it. And it's going to be very difficult for them. But I salute my people for being so brave that today, second time in Kabul, they had demonstration. Women first started in Herat, and then Nimruz, one of the very backward provinces that nobody would imagine. Today, they also had a woman demonstration there. And that's because most of these women are employed. They are the breadwinner of their families. So for them to actually see that they lost their jobs, their public life is totally finished and shattered is very difficult. It's not only about like the rights to go out and to enjoy and exercise your right. It's also about the rights to go and earn money and take care of your family. So life had changed a lot. Women were present in different sectors, including at the cabinet, public level, private sector, media, civil society, everywhere. And as a former cabinet minister, the way that things were being managed in the government, I could see that things are going to fall apart at some point with the mismanagement that we could see in the system. But things would fall so suddenly and everything will be handed over so easily to the Taliban was something that none of us predicted. And the level of quietness and wait and watch that the whole world, including the India, has adopted is not only shocking but also disappointing. I'm sure you must have heard.
Why do you say that? You're disappointed that India is taking such a cautious approach as a democracy, as a friend of the Afghan people?
Look, India is one of the strategic partners that we were looking up to. You have provided over $1 billion support for the development of Afghanistan. You were providing scholarship for more than 5,000 Afghans every year. And you have been one of the partners that most consistently helped us with the development of the country. We strategically know very well that this is a proxy war being waged by Pakistan and Afghanistan. And the first foreign visit that we have in Afghanistan is actually the head of ISI today being in Afghanistan and basically already starting the discussion about formation of the new government. So you know very well the role of Pakistan in the whole process. And on top of that, today I was also listening to Minister Qureshi, as if he is not the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Pakistan, but also Minister of Foreign Affairs of Afghanistan after this. So all these things are the realities and that happened. I remember that a few months back, I had a meeting with Ambassador Tandon in Indian Embassy. And I did tell him, I said, look, Afghanistan have changed, and this is what you need to educate your head office about it. Yes, you're looking into investing putting all your eggs in one basket, which is the government. But as ex-employee of the government or former Minister of Cabinet, I can tell you that things are not going well. And the way that things are going on with regard to nepotism, racism, and corruption in the government, things are going to fall down. One way or the other way, it is going to fall down. So it's good for you to look around and see that which are the other groups that you need to begin to collaborate with. You need to work with them, and you need to begin to build partnership with them. So same thing goes in terms of our expectation from India. Evacuation happened, and we were expecting that a number of Afghans, especially those that they have been working in media and the culture sector and private and civil society, should be evacuated by India. And somehow India should proactively discuss with all of us and see the possibility of intervening in the situation, because we heard many times from India saying that if Pakistan would intervene in the peace process directly in case of Afghanistan, we're also going to have our own intervention. But then when the time came for the actual intervention, we didn't see anything happening. So
are you saying in terms of the visas and the facilitation of getting people?
In terms of visas, in terms of evacuation, in terms of support for the different groups that they are right now resisting Taliban, we don't see anything happening on the ground. And this is the time to actually proactively engage. I was also part of the discussion that some of the Indian experts were saying that we have to engage with Taliban because they are in power. And I was honestly, once again, disappointed to hear that, because you know your problem. You know that Taliban are the proxy of Pakistan. So how could you engage with them? Even if you try to engage with them, do you think they will faithfully engage with you? No, not at all. But you have other people, other groups inside Afghanistan that you can engage with them, and they are going to faithfully engage with you. So that is something. And then by saying that Taliban are in power, they have all the power. Look, they captured the whole Afghanistan in 2 weeks because it was strategically handed over to them. I'm sure you must have heard the last conversation that former President Ghani had with Joe Biden. where he asked him for air support, and he said, I cannot continue the fight. But that was rejected. He was let down. They didn't support him. So on one hand, our national security forces didn't get any kind of support from the US that they were looking up to as their strategic support. And on the other hand, the moral and corruption in the system had also demotivated them. And as an Afghan, my heart shatters for our forces when I see them that they work so hard. They sacrificed 6,000 lives, not for the day that things will collapse in 2 weeks and everybody would blame them for collapse of the state in Afghanistan. But it all happened strategically because US abandoned us, and when the US abandoned us, everybody began to follow US. And on top of that, we saw that within the system, like, this was something that was going on, but somehow everybody decided to keep quiet about it. So wait and watch is not the right approach right now. Proactively engaging is important. One thing that we have to clearly see, that Taliban managed to capture the whole of Afghanistan in 2 weeks, but they have been fighting the resistance in the last 2 weeks. They have not been able to make any movement. This itself shows that how strategically everything was handed over to them, and it also shows their capacity on the battlefield. So I think helping.
You're so, I mean, you've been so articulate, and so the pain is so visible in the way you speak and the way you've conveyed your points very strongly, ma'am. I mean, hats off to you and to Mehbooba Siraj and all your colleagues there for enduring what you're doing. And you know, honestly, I want to come back to some of the points you've raised and take actually some of the issues that you flagged to our other panelists here in India. So Hasni, Heather, to you first. I mean, what Ms. Nargis Nehan just said about, you know, being disappointed with India's approach. The US abandoned us, as she said, and then everyone else seemed to follow suit. There was a sense even, you know, about that in the way India, for instance, handled evacuations of or allowing Afghan citizens to come here into India. How do you see, you know, how this is playing out, Hasni?
Well, as I said, I think that India is not stepping up to the plate, and I completely, you know, and I salute both Ms. Siraj as well as Ms. Nehan when they are able to speak out at a time like this. The truth is that India's actions, and of course, this is something the government itself has said, is that India's primary immediate concern after the evacuation of Indian citizens is that there should be no terrorism emanating from Afghanistan towards India. In this is completely lost 20 years of relationships with Afghans. And we see that playing out in the government's policy when it comes to Afghan citizens coming or wanting to come to India. To begin with, the government has not really helped evacuate Afghan citizens. I should put the exact number that the External Affairs Minister gave to the parliamentary members of parliament. 565 people evacuated in all. In that, 112 only are Afghan citizens. So that's the extent of what India has done in terms of evacuating Afghan citizens. And of course, 70 of those belong to the minority Sikh and Hindu communities who have long-term visas for India. The second, India announced e-visas for Afghan citizens, but as far as we know, these are not even over 50 that have been given in 3 weeks since they were announced on the 16th of August. So this e-visa that has been put out there as a kind of way of bringing Afghan citizens to India is not working so far, simply because you do not have the wherewithal to conduct security checks on people who apply online because we don't have a presence on the ground. So the promise of the e-visa is already faltering, if you ask me. And then the third thing the government did was to cancel all previously issued visas. They gave some kind of a story that, you know, some passports had been stolen by the Taliban or from Pakistan, or ISI officials had taken them from the Indian visa agencies, the private agency. But the truth is that the agency would never have more than, and this is something diplomats have told me, the agency would never have more than a day or 2 days worth of passports with them. So to have cancelled all pre-existing visas to Afghans, these are all people who have long-term relationships with India. These visas were given with some thought in mind to people who were known to the Indian embassy and to Indian officials. Those have all been cancelled. So I completely agree that the first instinct may have been to bring out Indians from Afghanistan. The second instinct may be some long-term idea that we will be able to stop terrorism emanating from Afghanistan reaching Indian shores. While that is a difficult proposition indeed, But the immediate reaction to Afghan citizens that India has worked with for 20 years, people who worked on Indian projects, people who trained in India, including military officials, intelligence officials, they're under severe threat there in Afghanistan right now. Women who have worked with India on projects, and India, deserves to and deserve to be listened to by India if they are feeling uncomfortable, if they are feeling unsafe there. Students who are in India who don't know whether they can stay on. They've been told they can probably stay on, but then they live on stipends. Those stipends have to be extended. Students who have got admission to Indian universities, students who have got scholarships from the ICCR, from the government itself to come here. These are not small numbers, Nidhi, and all of them are at present being given absolutely no hope. They are feeling let down. So I completely understand that. And I think beyond that, there was a role India could have played at the United Nations, which I don't think they have. And very quickly, I will say why that is. India was the president of the UN Security Council for the entire month of August when all of this played out. It presided over 3 discussions and 1 resolution, all of which were a watered down version of the previous one. So if they started on August 3rd, I think, with a resolution that said we will not accept, we will not support an Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, by the end, the resolution practically sees the Taliban as the default force in power in Afghanistan without getting any kind of commitments from the Taliban, whether it comes to representation, whether it comes to women and children, minorities, or the threat of terrorism. There's no actual commitment from the Taliban. And yes, I do think that the Taliban is looking essentially for that recognition. A big decision has to be taken at the UNGA, before that at the Accreditation Committee. Another big decision has to be taken at the Taliban Sanctions Committee, because remember, all of these leaders we're talking about, whether it's Baradar, whether it's Stanikzai, whether it's
terrorists,
they're all on the designated list.
Yes,
the question is, will their exemptions be renewed? Will those who do not have exemptions be given them? Are there going to be delisting of any of these terrorists? These are all places where India has to play a very, very large role. This is not the time for India to say we will wait and watch, or take some kind of a polite diplomatic view.
No, very well articulated. Very well articulated there, Suhasini. In fact, let me take that to Ambassador Sarna. That I know that foreign policy has to be pragmatic, and both with principles and pragmatism is sort of the ideal combination. But as the world's largest democracy, which has been a victim of cross-border terrorism, which makes the issue of terrorism very front and center as part of its foreign policy, can India afford to legitimize a government led by the Taliban? And what does it do then at a forum like the United Nations with the contradictions that Suhasini pointed out? Ambassador Sarna.
Thank you, Nidhi. I think the round of interventions that we have seen have really rounded off the debate. And I think to a large extent, most people are saying the same thing. And there is some amount of confusion that seems to have crept into the debate, which I would like to clarify firstly. Engagement is a word which is being used loosely to mean different things to different people. Engagement, in my view, doesn't mean that you engage only the Taliban. You engage all the sections. We shouldn't make that mistake again. You engage everybody you can. Secondly, engagement does not mean accepting that the Taliban as it is or that it will change. We know the reality, as Amitabh pointed out, that they will not change to a large extent. Engagement does not mean forgiveness. Engagement does not mean that we accept you in totality. Okay, this is an important point, because even if you have to do what you have to do in a negative manner, it means engagement. So let's be very clear what engagement means. It does not mean acceptance. On the second aspect, absolutely right. We have to engage with all aspects of Afghan society, particularly the ones which we have created goodwill. How we are going to do that? We have to engage with the resistance. How we are going to do that? Again, engagement in diplomacy does not mean that you engage with the prime minister or the president or the foreign minister. Engagement can be at any level, and its upgradation can depend upon the conduct. see your other aspect of how India should leverage its positions, say in the UN, etc. I think India, particularly in the Afghan context, is a strong moral force. India it talks from a position of historical strength. India must exert that position. India must exert that position. We have to make no compromises on our position on terrorism. We cannot afford to make them. We have to make no compromises on human rights, on women's rights, and we have to do it. But it doesn't mean that we just sit down and watch the waters flow. No, you move with it. You try to use your leverage. You build bridges with Russia, with Iran. You build bridges with the Central Asian republics, and you try to put pressure as much as you can for this government to become an inclusive government, for them to tone down. We can't also accept defeat from the word go, that they are so terrible that they will never change, so let's go home. That's not how it works out. And otherwise, then tomorrow there will be a debate saying, why didn't India do anything? Then watch and wait becomes paralysis. So I think we have to keep moving all the levers. We don't have to make compromises. And that's what happens in diplomacy. You know that as well as I do, that it's a lot of footwork all the time. It may not have immediate results, but I believe that there is a possibility here for principle, to a limited level of pragmatism, which does not mean a compromise. So, you have to have this fine distinction. I hope I've tried to make it clear.
Professor Mattu, let me ask you about that. I mean, as Ambassador Sarna says, use every leverage you have with any group, move with the flow, and and don't compromise on certain basic principles such as terrorism and human rights and the rights of women. However, how much influence do you think that India has with the Taliban? Is the Taliban firstly a monolith? Are we dealing with different factions? Are we dealing with different groups? Do we still have any leverage? I mean, the ISI chief, like we said right at the beginning, and it was referred to again, and as Ms. Nargis Nehan pointed out, is in Kabul today with drawing up what the government should look like. So what leverage do we have?
Taliban is not a monolith. We know that it's not a monolith. But if you have someone with a gun on their head, which is the ISI, they will all act in a similar fashion. Now, in the past, Brother was in the custody of the Pakistanis. The erstwhile Pakistani, the Afghan ambassador, faced a huge insulting ordeal in Pakistan. He's written about it, Mullah Zaif. So I agree that it is not a monolith. In fact, my friend Rustum Shah Mahmood, who I refer to as the sage of Mahmood, was always saying, reach out to the Taliban. There are sections that are pro-India because they have been so humiliated by Pakistan post 9/11 that they're willing to actually reach out. We didn't do that. What are the cardinal mistakes we made? One, we put all our eggs in the American basket, imagining that America, like God, will never leave Afghanistan. Unfortunately, both America and God have left Afghanistan. The second cardinal mistake is the one which Madam Nargis Nehan made. And this was against the advice, I understand, of even the ambassador. Put all our eggs in the Ashraf Ghani basket. And Ghani, you know what he did finally? He fled with all truckloads of money. So we did not reach out to the Afghan people or to the other sectors, to the people. The third mistake is not actually engage or arm. And I have no shame in saying this. I think we should, as Ambassador Nartet Sarna's predecessor, who seems to have disappeared somewhere, Muthu Kumar, in Dushanbe went and met Commander Masood, and that was the beginning of Indian assistance to the Northern Alliance. Saleh, after all, he is the de jure vice president. Find a way in arming, after all these years when we have had some degree of intervention. Surely you must have assets in Afghanistan who could do it. Bomb the Taliban, I say. I mean, what is this moral? If you're morally outraged, it's like Gandhi saying the Jews should have resisted the Nazis non-violently. Why can't you use both carrots and sticks? Why are you always saying, let's see, let's incrementally engage, let's see what happens, let's see if they've changed, let's see what the Iranians also say and the Russians say. I say, yes, do that. But what is the stick that you hold in your hand? Why should the Taliban reach out to you? Give me one reason, apart from wanting to sound reasonable, when the rest of the world is going to recognize him. What is the incentive for the Taliban to come out and say, we love India? They're going to create trouble for you today or tomorrow. You better recognize it. If Sirajuddin or his father or his cousin are the same network who attacked the Indian embassy in 2008, killed an Indian diplomat, senior diplomat, Venkatesh Rao, killed a brigadier in the army, you think they're going to suddenly not take the supari from the ISI to hurt your interests? It's not going to happen. You are deluding yourselves. Tactically, fair enough, if you can buy a Taliban leader who will help you secure some of your interests in Afghanistan, do it. But to actually make such a play out of it, reach out to people like Nargis Nehan and all the Afghans who stood by you. Give them visas. I am disappointed more than our Afghan friends are. I am disappointed that we are not standing firmly behind the people who stood by us, the people who are of the women of Afghanistan, the human rights activists, the others. All Pashtuns are not Taliban. Badshah Khan, Badshah Khan was a Pashtun. He had a legacy of being the frontier Gandhi. So to imagine that you can capsule the Taliban into the Pashtun is also a big mistake. But there are also Tajiks, there are Uzbeks who you can reach out to. To suddenly believe that the Taliban have come, it's like the Americans, that movie where the Americans used to believe the Russians are coming. Taliban are not such a great, huge force. It's you are making it into self-fulfilling prophecy if you think that they're going to just occupy power.
I think that's
Sorry,
what
I'm in probably a minority of one, but I think
to them. There is a resistance to them as well, and it's quite something that even 2 weeks after the fall of Kabul, a government actually hasn't yet been formed. So I think that you're both in agreement there. I quickly want to ask Ambassador Sarna about the Indian government's policy with regard to visas for Afghans and getting them out of Afghanistan. Are you disappointed, like some of our co-panelists are, and certainly our Afghan guest here is today, with the fact that India could have done much more to help?
I think we can still do. And I think the e-visa policy, e-visa initiative that was announced was in principle a very good initiative. I'm disappointed that only 50 have been issued. I don't know the practical difficulties that the boys are facing, but I think we should see how much we can expand that and how quickly we can help bring out, because again, the human element, I mean, one is the visas, one is humanitarian aid, one is the treatment of refugees. I think these are things which are constants. There will be practical difficulties in all of this, depending upon the situation that exists in Afghanistan and the kind of chaos that ensues, which I still believe that there will be more chaos than we have seen till now. But these are the issues on which we should be working on. Again, that's part of India's standing. I wouldn't decry the moral aspects of this. I like Professor Mattu's passion, but I don't think we need to be the next country to start going into bombing and trying to bomb Afghanistan into peace and order.
Okay, let me. We just have the last few minutes left. Let me ask Suhasini Haider this question. Suhasini, how much do you think domestic Indian politics is also playing into how India might decide to proceed on Afghanistan? And I'm asking this because we live in very strange, polarized times where the narrative is often driven by pro-government media in this country, which till a few days ago was sort of testing the patriotism of Indian Muslims vis-a-vis the Taliban takeover in Kabul, calling them terrorists, etc. But now that India has engaged with the Taliban formally, is singing a very different tune. And one channel tonight is hosting a Taliban roundtable and very proudly saying it is doing so. So, I mean, are you concerned that there is a sort of a confluence here, which shouldn't ideally be the case, but that it may happen?
Well, I think, Nidhi, one should set aside the narrative and just get to what the government is actually saying. I think there are two parts. to the government's policy that I think are again going to be as problematic as the original Citizenship Amendment Act was. Because in the Citizenship Amendment Act, Afghanistan was one of the countries from which India committed to help particularly migrants who had come illegally into India, but were only of specific religions. Those religions did not include Muslims. So because that was the government's decision, not to say we will help persecuted groups or persecuted minorities in neighboring countries, but specifically in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Bangladesh, we will only help these communities. So I think straight away the government has got stuck in a kind of loop over there. And if you see the Ministry of External Affairs' own statement, or the kind of statements we were given attributable to various sources, they essentially say we have been engaged in evacuating Indian nationals and Afghan nationals, especially Sikhs and Hindus. This is something you've heard again and again from the government, where they've been saying especially Sikhs and Hindus. Now, at the end of the day, over time, these numbers are not big. So to begin with, the government has set its ambitions very, very low when it comes to saying that it is opening its heart to its Afghan brothers and sisters. This is something Prime Minister Modi said after that first CCS meeting. I don't see that very large heart. And I think the second part to that is a kind of idea that we are hearing that, India does not have space for refugees. Let's remember, even in the 90s, when, India did allow many different Afghans to come to India. And we know that families of many important leaders live here even today. There were essentially about 11,000 Afghan refugees were actually left in India after all that turmoil. So these are not refugees who are coming to India because they want to migrate, but because they need refuge from the current situation, the current crisis in Afghanistan. I would like to see India show a larger heart. I would like to see the government show a larger heart, but you're absolutely right. There is a communal aspect to it. There is a religious aspect to it, which has come from the government because of its own decision to promulgate a law that sought to see the difference between people fleeing for their lives, whether they were from one community or another. And as someone pointed out, are you going to ask a person who's fleeing to safety, what is your religion, and then decide whether or not to help them? No. But what the government has done effectively is to say that there is a category of people that we are helping. The first is Indian citizens, then we come to the minorities in Afghanistan, and then we come to the others, no matter whether they also face exactly the same kind of pressures and exactly the same kind of risk as those minorities.
Absolutely. I can take a couple of questions because most of the questions we've got have already been answered by our panelists, and I want to give the last word to Ms. Nehan. So before that, one question, Dr. Shanti, Yeshi Dawa has asked, what will China's partnership with the Taliban mean to the world? That's an important question.
Yeah, I think it's an important question because the space left by the US has been taken up by China. And China has had economic interest in Afghanistan, as you know, that they were interested in the minerals. They did want to have some kind of strategic presence there because of the position Afghanistan offers. And more importantly, even their own concerns about radicalization, which would affect their province in Xinjiang. So having said that, China has always had relationship with the Taliban. In the 1990s, when the Taliban captured power, they were one of the first countries to reach out. Chinese ambassador went to Kandahar, met Mullah Omar, and they have maintained that contact. And again, we saw that in the month of July, even before the takeover by the Taliban in Kabul, that China had made this outreach and has had relationship with them. And that I think is very important development, because given the fact that China and Pakistan have close relationship and the space they have found here will be useful in sense of having some kind of pressure on India, and also expanding the CPEC and OBER project in the long term. So China's presence will actually lead to fundamental questions of whether it will lead to India-China competition in Afghanistan and West Asia and Central Asia. And if this would mean blocking out of India's Central Asia policy, where the trade and transit was actually very essential, in which Afghanistan is the center role. So I think we need to watch what China is doing, but China will be a little wary about getting in. It might not get in the way US is done in terms of sending troops, but will actually work in a way in which its economic interests are protected, and would also look at areas in which it can extract minerals from that country. And more importantly, would be a counterpoint for India in the region.
All right, the last question. Vinay Nigam, Professor Mattu has a question for you, asking, the Foreign Secretary Harsh Shringla today saying that, the Taliban have been reasonable, as Suhasini was pointing out earlier, in addressing India's concerns in the limited engagement that's taken place so far. And yet you have a Taliban leader who's made a statement only yesterday that they have a right to raise issues about Muslims residing in Kashmir. How do we see this then?
If what he said was that the Taliban are reasonable, I really don't know who he's been speaking to, but I imagine this must be Mittal telling him what happened in Doha. But to really, on the basis of one statement, to make a generalization is perhaps too much to call for. But he is the foreign secretary. He may have access to information that I don't have. And it may turn out that despite my
reservations,
my prophecies of doom and gloom, the foreign secretary may be right that the Taliban have suddenly become very nice people and want to change the world in a very fair, progressive manner. But I imagine that Nargis Nihan and the other Afghans may not agree with the foreign secretary on that score.
And are probably not holding their breath. And Nargis Nihan, my last question is to you. And this is perhaps a more personal question. How are you holding up? How are you holding up, all of you, at this very, very difficult time? And what gives you the strength, honestly, to fight this? Please unmute your mic, ma'am.
We are a very resilient society. We have seen even harder days than this. And last time when the Soviet Union left Afghanistan, when the whole world abandoned us, we were in a much more difficult situation than now. At least if I share my own personal experience with you, I know that my whole family was panicking. Civil war was going on. I was just 12 years old. I knew the problem that was going on, but I had no solution for it. The difference that I see this time, because of connectivity that we have with the rest of the world, because of level of awareness that we have, and we know the world order, everything. Yes, we were panicking, all of us as citizens. We were shocked with everything falling apart so quickly. But in the meantime, we also knew which door to knock, where to go, and where to raise our voice. So that is giving us the strength to hold together. But also, when I look at the days that we were in Kabul, I was in Kabul for 1 week when the Taliban took over until I was evacuated to Norway by support of Norwegian government. We already, a group of us, even in those early days, on the 4th day that Taliban took Kabul, we went and we had a meeting, group of us, we had a meeting with Dr. Abdullah and from President Karzai. We asked them what is going on. We want to know about the situation of the country. The situation, the country is not doing well. Are you doing any kind of mediation? Is there hope for formation of a national government? Do you really see a change in Taliban or not? So we had 2 hours of long discussion with them. And even we asked them, we said that, can you please arrange our meeting with the political committee of Taliban? We would like to ask these questions from them as well. So then you see the demonstration of women that started even from a very progressive province like Herat and Kabul, all the way down to Nimruz. Nobody was expecting that women in Nimruz will go out and will demonstrate for their right. So they said what is holding us together is that we are a much more aware citizen now. We know our rights, and we are very resilient to fight for those rights. We have the confidence. We never trusted, and we are being betrayed not only by the world, not only by the Taliban, but also by our own leaders, by being and acting so irresponsibly in terms of management of the whole peace process. But we have full confidence in ourselves as a nation that we are going to stay together, and we are going to fight all these difficulties. We are connected. The technology is providing us the platform that we raise our voice from wherever we are about the situation and keep on advocating for a solution, a permanent solution for Afghanistan. And I'm sure that you'll begin to see uprisings, more of civil uprisings by women, youth, and others. And as well as you're also going to see the pockets of resistance in different parts of the country. So for Taliban, it was very easy to basically win a war against a government that was highly unpopular, that people were really fed up with, and people had no motivation to support it. But governing a very complicated society like Afghanistan, where the expectation of people is very high, the attention of international community is very much reduced, and in the meantime, Taliban, people do not trust Taliban, it's not going to be easy. Whether the Taliban like it or don't like it, people still see them as proxy of Pakistan, and people are very much sensitive when it comes to state affairs and interference of Pakistan. So it's not going to be easy, and all these together are providing us the opportunity that we organize ourselves and we perhaps start another round of negotiation with the Taliban and tell them that, okay, you are in power and you saw that governing Afghanistan is not easy. Let's have a discussion and see how realistically, what kind of political order we need to have in the country and what kind of a structure we need to have in place.
Given us a very good sort of understanding or an overview of how things are not so simple and cut and dry on the ground. And please know that you have a lot of friends here in India who stand with you in solidarity. I know you're disappointed with perhaps the government, but there are plenty of Indian people who certainly stand with you in solidarity. I think the government does as well. For whatever reason, things may not have worked out perfectly, but we still have time to correct some of those actions. Thank you so much, Nargis Nehan. We wish you the very best in whatever lies ahead. And thank you to you, Ambassador Sarna, to you, Professor Mattu, Dr. Shanti D'Souza, Mehbooba Siraj, who joined us earlier, and Suhasini Haider. Always a pleasure to talk to all of you. Thank you very much for speaking.
Thank you.
Thank you.